Alrighty, welcome to NycosRPG, everybody. I'm Jonathan Albin, and today we are in the Toolbox, Game Master's Toolbox, and we are going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is how do you make your game compelling? I've got some secrets and some things that I do just about every week that I think will be really helpful. So before we get into that, I do, of course, have to make my quick reminders. This is NycosRPG. It is a site that is dedicated to making your games excellent and to provide you with all of those tools. I want to remind you to subscribe right now here on Twitch, because Twitch has a deal where if you are a subscribed member, you don't have to watch the commercials. And I know how much of a pain those are, every so often having to stall out and wait for the commercial to break before you get broken back into the story, and I may have moved on to another point. So make sure that you subscribe right now to get that resolved. If you're watching this on YouTube, the subscription does not get rid of commercials yet. I have maybe somewhere down the road, but do realize that by subscribing on YouTube, you really help us to build this channel and to get more of this information out for more storytellers to make every game you play in as excellent as possible. Alrighty, so I did my bit for that. So now, Game Master's Toolbox, we are going to be talking about how do we make your games excellent? How do we change and modify the way you are running your games to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. And the primary way to do so is to create real emotion in the imaginary place that you've put the players. And in order to get to real emotion, we have to get past the fake emotion. And I'll come back to that in just a second. I do want to change my lighting. I realize that I'm still sitting partially in the dark. And the one thing we don't want is game masters or players in the dark. So there you have it. Alrighty, so when we talk about creating real emotion, that's a challenge, because when you are in a game environment, you are sitting at a table across from each other. You've probably seen each other 2 or 3 times this month in already, and that doesn't elicit any emotion necessarily unless there's something going on behind the scenes. I'll leave that alone. All right, so the way to create real emotion in an imaginary scene stems from a bunch of different steps. And the first one is you have to create an environment that is attractive and appealing, and it is desired by the players, because if they are part of the story and they are part of the action and they are able to interact and be as real as you can be in a fictional setting, then it makes it easier for them to capture the concept of emotions. This does tend to work better in terms of long tail campaigns, the idea of multiple episodes in the same story with the same characters in an ongoing fashion. Far more easy to create emotional conditioning and connection if you are. I got a weird line in front of my face here, so let me get that done. So you want to get the player emotion to derive from their interaction with the world, which tends to make it tends to come easier if you're running an ongoing campaign. The players become familiar with the characters. They start to perhaps feel affinity for them. If you've enforced one of the basic rules of roleplay, which is first person in all roleplay environments, then you get the more direct interaction at that emotional level. And the first secret to creating real emotion is to run your stories sequentially week over week in a campaign story type of element. Now, there are those who are who are sandbox folks, and the sandbox folks might balk a little bit at that. But the reality is even in a sandbox, if the story is ongoing in the same locale, session after session, as the players make the choices to move themselves around, you still can create a more direct emotional tie with those personas that have week after week interaction. The characters that are in the story, therefore, need to be in the story week over week, so there's a reason to feel. Now, I'm going to back up for a second, even though that's my first knee-jerk reaction is say run campaign, because running a campaign gives you the edge in terms of getting the players to feel the emotion or create the emotion in session. The elements that generate emotion really stem from the story elements. And when I mean story elements is if you are playing in a environment that has horror in it, then you're going to have players who are going to respond in a horrified fashion if you're providing them with the motif in such a way that they are feeling it, which means your vocabulary needs to fit the kind of emotion you're trying to get to. If you're trying to be scary, don't drop too many one-liner jokes. If you're going for humorousness, then the opposite would be true. Don't focus on the gore and the horror, unless you have a really tweaked sense of humor. But that's a complete different issue. But the story elements, the plot, the theme, the setting, the ambiance, the vocabulary, if you're using miniatures and terrain, try to get those to visually match so that the input that the players are taking in. Now, I have specified before that the Nykos mechanism is designed to be in theater of the mind, and within the parameters of theater of the mind, the necessity to use visual cues isn't that important. However, I will say, for example, mood lighting, the very way that you set up the ambiance of the place that you're playing can help to invoke emotion. Now, do we want these emotions to be role-played emotions, or do we want them to be actual emotions? Well, there's I suppose as many different ideas on that as there are game masters, but my general thoughts are to ensure that your players are aware that it is a role-play game, that this is a safe space to present emotion in game and not push the envelope, and that comfortability will come over time, but it actually is easier to do if you've had conversations with the players in advance of your sessions, so that they feel that comfort and they feel that protective environment for them to emote. Now, what kinds of emotions do you want in games? Well, this again depends on what your story elements are and what you're trying to convey. But some great examples are when they have succeeded in some quest. You certainly want them to be jubilant and celebratory and excited. And likewise, if there's been a nearly fatal or fatal encounter with with NPCs or even character personas meeting their end in the story, you definitely want to elicit the sorrow, the grief, the despondency that would be natural with those kinds of events. And when you are successfully invoking these emotions, it might take some time to process. For example, if it's been a long, drawn-out engagement of a few weeks before they actually get to the fruition of the story and they are finally free of the villain, don't expect them to shift gears back to standard environment, because they're going to want to express that jubilation. I have had players who literally say, we want to have a non-story week next week because we want to follow through on the uh, elements of success that we got. So the shopping spree, the burying of the treasure, if that's a thing. The key to emotion is that it is a rising, falling kind of an element. You just like any good actor can't do a death scene immediately because he's got to get his mind into the right place to provide the appropriate gravitas to the moment. In same fashion, as you are building up towards your exciting moments or your thrilling moments or your dangerous moments, you have to give the players time to adjust to that. So the idea of building your adventure to a climax, making things slightly more dangerous week over week to build that stress so that when they get to that release, it's genuine is a great recommendation. So beyond your setup, you need to make sure that you're using a vocabulary that carries through what it is you're trying to convey. So if you are wanting them to feel the dread, then certainly describe in detail the creepiness, but also realize that the benefits of silence in certain cases is huge. I believe it was it was Marvin Gaye, I believe, that said that it's as important to play the pauses as it is to play the notes when you're music. I mean, I might be wrong on who that quote is, but the element is it's a musical concept. The idea of it's just important to play the pauses to allow the beats to actually have impact. And so therefore, if you are giving a narrative description and you want it to be creepy, leave stuff out. Let the players form the rest of the pictures in their own minds. Let them develop their own takes on what's going on. Because when you provide them the opportunities to do the building, number one, your work is half as difficult. And number two, you are making the story theirs as much as it is yours. And as a game master with 50 years of experience, I know that I'm perhaps overspeaking it or overstating it because some players and some game masters aren't to that position yet. But the idea of creating a story that the players will drive is really important as well. If you want a good, solid emotional response, the players need to be the ones who have made the decisions that have brought them to this particular point. So let's take an example of a large combat, and you have the king of a region actually fighting alongside his troops, and the adventurers are only a small segment of that army. His death scene won't mean much to the players unless they have had interactions with him. So allow them to have connections with those that you want to have them care about. If you want to build rapport with them, have conversations with them, and in character as that persona. Another obvious, perhaps not, but a generally obvious thing would be if you are using particular voices for certain NPCs, maintain that continuity week over week so they get used to that speech pattern and are recognizing that persona, not even by your description of them, but by how they sound and how they react, maybe their mannerisms. These are all things that roleplay are really good at producing, but they are sometimes not necessarily the forefront of your mind. If you've been playing several months and they're suddenly meeting somebody they haven't seen in a while, you might have to go back and look in your notes and see what you gave yourself in terms of direction to make sure that they get that true impact, or else it will feel false. I've actually had players, because I made a mistake in that way, when a NPC, especially an NEP, somebody who is involved with their storyline, is no longer there. Whenever I do an NPC voice, they challenge whether or not that's really the person that I said it was, or whether that person actually is now been replaced. And in a game where you've got a lot of paranoia already built in, make sure that you're able to dissuade them by maintaining the continuity of your NPCs. The next thing is to make sure that the story is something that the players are interested in. If the players are going through the motions and doing actions, you really can't expect them to feel when things go awry or things go amazing, because they're not invested. So you have to make sure that you have drawn your players into the game you're trying to run. And I think this might be really important. When you are engaging them and you're having them emote, you have to be able to show emotion. Maybe you're not the greatest character actor in the world. Maybe you're not good at it. These are the parts you might want to practice, or maybe even record and review yourself to make sure you're eliciting the kind of response you're looking for. Now, the reason why I'm saying all of this is that the very idea of creating real emotion in your campaign does give your players something to really hang their hat on and to hold on to in terms of their memory of that scene. The memorability, the remembrance of your game depends on it being valuable. So in order to make a moment memorable, you have to give them something to remember. So strong narrative description, poignant dialogue, and direct interaction with the personas in the scene, these are absolutely critical. I think the biggest and most useful part of this is don't try to generate solid, real emotion in every scene. Some parts of the story aren't meant for it. Some of them simply are too humorous and silly to be made grave, and maybe even the moments of great excitement need to be played up and down emotionally so that the persona, the players, don't develop exhaustion. I've had groups that want a very dramatic story, but then when they have done it for 3 or 4 weeks, they start to become a little bit fatigued, and maybe don't throw themselves into the role as heavily, or perhaps the emotion is the same as it was a couple of weeks ago, so there's no reason or no desire to make it more exciting or more thrilling. So just realize that the ebb and flow of the action scenes, the ebb and flow of the dramatic scenes, and the ebb and flow of the whimsical and irrelevant scenes really need to be fairly well mixed up. We'll go into variability and how to establish that in our next video, but I wanted to make sure that we've got this concept of emotion being something you bring to the table, but you bring it in small doses. Make sure that you're being consistent with it, and that the persona are given an opportunity to care about the scene in order to make the emotional facet of it real. I have actually had death scenes that 3 or 4 years later, players still, become quiet and hushed when they talk about it, because it was such a momentous part of their history, of their experience with roleplay. So I do want to thank you for sticking with me for this show. I know it's relatively short, but I really want to get this information out to you. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel on both YouTube and here on Twitch. And remember, the benefits are that you get the opportunity of not having to deal with commercials if you subscribe here on Twitch. One other thing I did want to mention is that there are 4 places where emotion can be brought into it. And in order to make those moments memorable, I want to go over them really quickly. And before I do that, I do want to mention, if you notice the 2 keywords down below, those are clues to a weekly challenge. I had different ones yesterday, so make sure you go back and watch that video if you didn't catch them. These are giving you clues to a trivia question that I will be asking on Friday. And whoever answers in the comment section on YouTube with the answer to that trivia question will get a PDF download of the soon to be released NycosRPG Master Book. It's in PDF form currently, and that will be provided to the first person, the first in time listing of the right answer by a commenter. So you feel free to leave hints or suggestions if you want to in the comments before that, but do kind of honor the idea of the question, because I'm not going to ask it until that day. So don't be posting things like the answer is blah blah when you haven't yet received the question. So I'll be making sure that by only accepting the comments on that Friday video. So now, having said that, I'm going to now ignore them for the rest of this presentation. But when you are wanting to create the emotion, as I said, the easiest way is to build a prologue that foreshadows it. Talk about the person, talk about how important the scene is, perhaps talk about what might transpire, give them kind of a heads up on the gravity so that the players will play to that. Generally speaking, players dig the idea of being in the role. Those players who are of different play styles may not find it such, but those that are familiar with and appreciate the long tales do kind of get a gist of where the story is going by the prologue. I call it the Our Story So Far segment, where we talk about what happened last week and lead into this one. But generally that gives them an idea of where we are headed. Second thing is to make sure that your narration is in keeping with your theme. If you are trying to invoke fearfulness and danger and risk, try to downplay the humor and the glibness so that they can understand how potentially bad this might be. Also, in your description of the situation, in the microcosm, make sure that it also fits the emotional state you're trying to elicit. I'm not saying that we're manipulating emotion, because all we're doing is providing the players with the environment where that emotion might be possible. But by using terms and word usage that fits the gravitas or the intensity or the humor of the scene you're trying to build, you'll get the proper response. And then finally, dialogue within the scene needs to be kept to the scene itself. Even if you are going for humor, if it's going to be player versus player, or rather persona versus story quips, like for example, quite often we have the NPCs basically throwing down challenges and then the PCs reacting to that. If that's the direction you're going in, then the dialogue needs to be maintained in terms of consistency so that you don't fall off of the emotional wagon and keep them in the direction you're trying to go. Now, we are at the end of this episode. I want to thank you for being here. I hope that something I've presented helps your game be more emotional, how to make the moment, how your moments have become memorable because of the things that I've offered. If so, make sure you like, follow, subscribe, all that nice thing. Hit the buttons down below to make sure you get to see every video. If you want to be a part of the community, you can join us at patreon.com. By becoming a member of the Patreon, you also gain access to our Discord channel, which then affords you the opportunity to actually play in the role play games with us on the weekends. There's more information about that on our Discord, so it's a weird combination. Join the Patreon, learn about the games, come and play in them. Alrighty, so thanks again. I will see you next time. Remember, we record 10 o'clock in the morning and 11 p.m. at night, Monday through Friday. And so tonight's episode is going to be dealing with how to direct the flow of story. And I will talk to you again next time.